Welcome to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. This is our weekly venture into the world of small to medium-sized businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives success.
So our goal here is to help you grow and to be the best you can be, both in business and personally. To do that, we identify and we discuss topics that will hopefully help you as you work to build a successful business.
We also interview business owners and executives. It's our hope that you may be able to gain insight on ways to help you be a better leader and provide a better culture for your people.
Our mission here is to help you pull the chute once a week to work on your business instead of always working in your business.
So we hope you find these discussions insightful, helpful, and useful.
And thanks for your support. We hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. As always, Jana and I are so thrilled that you're here to support us and to support the podcast and listen in. And we have a great guest this morning, Jana. But before we jump into that, how are things in Nashville?
Things in Nashville are rolling smoothly, no weather issues, no craziness, no weird political stuff. It's just all.
I love it. And here in Chicago, it's actually calm for a while too. So not so bad. Not so bad. Hey, Jana, we have Lisa-Maree Blumenfeld or Field. Did I say that wrong? Feld. Sorry about that, Lisa. Boy, that's the funny part about this show. We don't care if we make a mistake. We just keep rolling.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Right. Blumenfeld. Sorry about that. But anyway, I'm excited to talk to you because of your background and you're a different kind of guest for us. We don't have very many people that do what you do, and I'm not giving it away because I want you to give it away. But one of the things that we like to do is ask you to give us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today, because you can do it much better than we could ever read. So we'll just let you kind of go through and do it for us, okay?
Fair enough. Yes. Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I'm Lisa, and I am a founder of an HR consulting firm. Mainly, we're based out of San Francisco, but we work nationwide, helping startups and mid-sized companies with their kind of building their HR and their people operations functions. So pretty much anything having to do with the employee lifecycle, we handle so that founders and leaders can focus on their product and getting it to market and all of those things. So it's been really fun. We've been doing this for almost a decade now. So
really? Wow. And so how did you get into HR? Let's back up a little bit. Give us a little bit of background.
Gosh. I wish I could say that, I always wanted to be in HR. I don't know if there's anyone who
yeah, right.
always wanted to be in HR.
Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? An HR
dream.
person.
To deal with people and their issues.
I know. I much like I think most people in HR completely fell into it years and years and years ago. I won't date it, but I was recruited to be a recruiter, which was also a job I didn't know existed at the time. I was pretty much right out of college. And so I did recruiting for agencies, and I loved it. I loved that kind of competitive moment of like getting the fill and like really building those relationships and getting them into the right positions for them and hearing about their lives. And I just loved all of it. The thing that was missing for me though, is that, you helped them get this job and then they kind of go on with their lives. And so it kind of was the end of that, relationship that you had built. And so that's when I recognized that there's this way to continue that, and that was through HR. So, taking them through the onboarding process and all of the things that they would need while being successful in a role was really fulfilling. And so, like I said, I just kind of fell into it while working internally doing recruiting, and had the opportunity to test it out a little bit. And so worked in some like larger Fortune 500 companies. So I know what it's supposed to look like in the end. But worked with a number of different startups and then got a chance to work in an accelerator. So really working with a lot of very small companies at the very beginning where they're just squirrely and trying to figure it out. It's my favorite. So it's just a totally haphazard career path that's really worked out.
That's great. So what do you prefer, the smaller or the larger companies? It sounds like you like the smaller to mid-sized.
Smaller.
Yeah.
Yes. I love the smaller.
Yeah. Tell us why. I'd love to know why, Lisa.
Yeah. I think I like the building side of things. work with a founder who really understands, or at least is trying to really understand their product, and how to get it into market, and going through the fundraise process and all of that, you really get to come in and help them determine what the path is going to be for the business. I think for me, as much as I appreciate the ability that I've had to like work in these larger companies, it was more kind of in a maintenance mode, and it's important. It just wasn't as exciting, I guess, for me to be in that mode all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
size is small for you? Is it because one makes no sense, right? I mean, it's a solopreneur. Why would you need HR at that point? So give me what's the
That's a
small,
good
what's the
point.
medium?
Yeah, I would say the smallest one I think that we've come into was 2 employees, but they had raised. And so it was 2 and they became 10, in like a month. So a lot of times it's that fundraise is the pivot point because they're getting the funds in to then go higher. So the founders that have done this a few times now have recognized the importance of getting HR in early. So we have come into these much smaller companies. I would say that like it's usually about between 10 and 20 employees where founders are thinking, gosh, I just don't want to have to do this anymore, or they've gotten some questions or issues coming up that it's outside of their both interest, but skill and background. And then we've stayed with companies up until like 100, 150 employees,
wow.
depending on the makeup and what they need. So it varies by industry and type of employees, classification of employees, and the complexity there. So every company is just totally different.
Oh, that's great. So
Yeah.
did you start Retain, or are you co-founding, or how did that all start?
No, I started Retain. When I was working in this accelerator, which was an amazing experience, they had kind of changed their model, so they weren't providing the services as much anymore. And so at that point, it was faced with, do I go back in-house and run HR for another startup, or maybe I just see if there's a market for this, and there's been a market for this, which has been great, and it gives me the opportunity to work with 20 to 30 different companies at a time. And I love the context shifting throughout the day, and getting to work with so many different products and founders has been really exciting for me. So yeah, I started it in 2016 and still going.
I love it. So what's changed, Lisa?
Oh gosh.
What has changed in 10 years? Like, what have you noticed that's a big change for HR?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of change, I would say, even in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I bet.
EDI has to be killing you, right?
Yes. I would say it's an interesting path to follow, even if you follow it. And I don't want to take this down some sort of a strange political route, but with every election cycle, with new people coming into leadership and power and different rules and different areas of focus, it has drastically changed HR.
Wow.
So we spend a lot of our time trying to stay on top of all of those things so that our founders don't have to. And it's fairly frequent that we're saying, hey, FYI, this law either has changed or will change. And we've already drafted the policy and the comms plans to make sure that your teams are informed and they have the resources that they need. But it's just a lot of things to keep up with. There's a lot of things changing even now. There's this joke, and it's a nerdy HR joke, but like, if you can do HR in San Francisco, you can do it anywhere. And so it's, there's the federal, the state, the local ordinances and things like that. We need to.
And then there's California.
And then there's California, and then there's San Francisco. So
yeah,
we like to make things really employee friendly and complicated here. So.
Oh, that's great. And so how has AI affected HR for you guys? Right? That's a
good question.
Topic.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, actually, AI has come into this. And I think, on the most obvious of levels, we do have some people who are like, oh, I don't know if we need HR because I can just ask ChatGPT how to have this conversation. And, I think for me, it's like, sure, go ahead and try that. Let's see how that goes, but there's a lot of risk that comes into taking human emotion out of communication.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see that, and that's started to impact turnover. The more people and employees feel like their resources are pulled away and their connective tissue to another human is taken away, and they're just kind of sent to a robot for answers, the less loyalty and ties they feel like they have with that business. And so we're seeing some very interesting trends in turnover based off of that. And that's not just AI. I would say that there's a lot of contributing tech factors in that. But AI is here to stay. I think there's a lot of interesting and cool ways that even HR people can utilize AI to streamline things and just, make things go faster, especially that kind of day-to-day tedious work. Thankfully, there's tools that are coming out that are automating those things, and it allows us to now go into more of that much more strategic side that, you can try to rely on AI for some of it, but we're seeing that not work so well. So I think there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Lisa. If it has to do with human interaction, it's not ever going to work. Look what it did with all of these service contracts and all these things where you would have to call in a customer service and you were getting a bot or you were getting an automated. It didn't work. People ended up leaving whatever, whether it was their cell service or their, dishwashing repair person, whatever. People need
exactly
interaction, especially when it comes to solving objections and things that are, that where a person feels like they need to be taken care of. That customer service aspect. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
And there's the emotional intelligence, right? AI doesn't provide emotional intelligence, and that's a huge factor. So how do you deal with that? So
and I think too, it's an interesting timeline that this all happened, right? Because AI, as much as it's not a new concept, I think it's still new to some people. But that kind of happening at and around the same time of COVID, where people were already starting to be forced into this much more isolated spot, that need and desire and craving for human interaction was so much higher. And then to come back from COVID and still need that and crave it, and now it's like been replaced with robots, I think has been a really monumental shift for people. So there is that craving, but we're also seeing people who are newer in their career, who might have started in their career during COVID, and now they have a lot of reliance on AI, and the human connection component is very strange because they had to build that. They need it, but they don't know how to do it. And so it's creating these very interesting interpersonal relationships at work. That communication is just a really interesting place right now for that kind of thing. Yeah.
And we talk, and I bring this up just because we talk about it a lot, but and it's in Jana's wheelhouse, but we have 4 generations in the workforce. How are you dealing with, as you just brought up, communication, right? How are you dealing with 4 generations in the workforce these days?
It's a really interesting question. And I wish I had some sort of magic formula on how to make that easier. And I think the fact of the matter is it's just not easy right now. And I think, the more that we can spend our time on the HR side, kind of going into like a coach mode of figuring out the best ways to have people interact in more of a mentorship capacity, having people who are newer to the workforce, recognizing that there's things that they know much better than those who've been in the workforce for a long time, like technology, right? The emerging technology. My kids are teaching me how to use things all the time. And so I think that is a thing where they can contribute and train up. But we also have people who've been in the workforce and have, dealt with so many different situations. And it's just like a resource that to just ignore or to not figure out how to plug into is such a waste. So the more that we can try to figure out how to connect people in meaningful ways where they understand that it's not just being told something from someone, but there's something that they can contribute to. This kind of mutual relationship, I think, is really helpful. But I also think there's a lot of explanation that needs to happen too, as to how all of these different generations grew up and what their expectations are and all of those things, and how in some cases they're just drastically different, and how founders are having to, and leadership teams are having to adjust for that, sometimes begrudgingly, adjust to that.
Yes.
Is, it's quite the process. So I don't think there's any smoking gun right answer type thing. It's just, the communication, I think, is what I always come back to with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And there has to be an open platform for these teams and these companies, especially as they're smaller, to be able to communicate the strengths and challenges, I say, not weaknesses, but the strengths and challenges of each generation. Because as there's something very strongly to speak about experience, and a lot of the younger generation has to understand the older generation might not be as technologically savvy, but they have experience in how to deal with people and emotions, and like you said, Jeff, emotional intelligence. So there is something for all of them to contribute. It's just somebody setting that platform so that they have the respect, the freedom, and the space to communicate it all, figure it all out. Yeah, that's
right. Yep.
Yeah. So Lisa, are you finding that the younger generation, and I'm teeing this up just because I believe I know what I feel, that the younger generation wants to know why they have to do things, versus the older generation? Because when I grew up, I'm a baby boomer, right? And when I grew up, it was, keep your head down, do your job. We don't pay you for, for your ideas. We just pay you to do the work, right?
Pay you to do the work. That's
yeah,
so
right.
true.
Yeah. So are you finding that the younger generation is really looking for the why?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think it's actually been, I don't know how candid I can be here, but
as candid as you want. This is a conversation,
Go
please.
for it.
I think in some ways, especially at the beginning, it seemed really annoying and kind of entitled when there were, people were coming in and being, asking all these questions about like, well, does this even move the needle? Why is this important? Like, that's not really my job. That kind of mentality. But I think what's actually happened in that is it has encouraged more questions about the why, which are important. Because oftentimes it was just the given that like, this is your job and this is what you do. But I think it's healthy to have someone, and this is why in many cases, like diversity matters, right? To have people come in with a different lens, that they look at the world through, I think is really important, so that they can ask those questions. And we're seeing that from this newer generation, to be able to come in and say, well, wait a second, what is the purpose of this? Am I contributing to the actual cause that you sold me on in coming here? Or am I just doing busy work because that doesn't seem like a good use of my time? Again, that translation sometimes sounds entitled, but I think what can be really helpful is giving people permission to think critically about a variety of different things that work. And I think that that's made the workplace a much more interesting place to be, and has transformed the workplaces that are open to those questions.
Yeah, it's funny because Jen and I are probably more of you have a much larger audience than we would have from a coaching standpoint, I think, because of all the different companies and all the different people that you work with. That's why I was asking the question. But we have found that the why because aspect works really well. I need you to do this. Why? Because this is the result we're looking for. And once you do that, they go, oh, all right, this makes sense then. Okay, right. Yeah.
Got it.
Versus the, why am I doing this? This makes no sense.
Right. Right. And I think that kind of goes back to the earlier point of having someone that they feel that they can ask those questions to and be respected enough to get an honest, authentic answer. That's where things are going to be successful moving forward. But you're right. You have to have someone in a leadership function who is willing to spend that time explaining it, and also willing to hear the feedback on that too, and find if there's some sort of midpoint. But you're right. I mean, there are elements of a job that everyone hates, and things just kind of have to happen. And sometimes that's the answer, right? Like, no, this isn't going to be the thing that goes into the product that gets shipped tomorrow. And yet it's critical. And by doing it, it allows for, this chain of reactions to happen in order for that to go. So I do think that the honesty piece is really important. And some people are going to respond to that. And there's always going to be those that don't. And that's
Yeah.
kind of okay too, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jan and I always like to ask, what's the probably most difficult situations, one or two things that you just seem to always have to deal with?
Yes, they come to mind.
Difficult situations. I think that's a good question. I think one that's fairly consistent is it's the same problem, but you're coming at it from two different areas. Either a company that feels like, oh, this person's a rock star in the business, and so I'm going to promote them to be a manager without even finding out if they ever wanted to be a manager, or explain to them the responsibility that being a manager is tied to, right? There's that. The flip side is also true when you have someone who's coming up and they're kind of demanding to be a manager of people, and trying to explain to them that there is a process and there needs to be a business need for even having a manager, but also like, do they have the skills or the training to take on that role? I think that sometimes people feel like it's just an honor, without recognizing it's just a ton of work. That there has to be some training and background in order to do it successfully. So I think we run into that a lot from both angles, where I'm constantly trying to slow people down and just say, okay, let's really walk through what it means to manage people, what that responsibility is. So I think that would be the biggest one. I think it's funny, I just keep kind of lean on that one as like the biggest. Communication just within an organization is the second piece. I think that most of the time people have the best of intentions, but they don't necessarily take the time to process through how what they're going to say will be heard. And that's why, you know, coaches are so important for leaders, but to really help slow people down and make sure that they understand the impact of what they're saying and how it's going to be interpreted and how to prepare for that, I think is the second piece that people don't understand, like that impact all the time.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yes.
All right, one more question before we have to kind of close things out here.
Sure.
What's something you've changed your mind about since you've been
Oh gosh.
your own business, had your own business? What's something that you thought you knew how to do 10 years ago, but you've really changed your mind about it now?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I had never had my own business before. And so I think I underestimated the amount of what is the word? Lack of sleep. Like just kind of the like overall stress of, and it's not all bad stress, but like, especially when you have employees that you really, really care about. And, you know, with us, it's a consulting practice, right? And so it really is, and that's a terrible term for it, but like you eat what you kill, right? So it is, I mean, it's just very important to stay on top of pipeline and all these things. And my background had been HR. And so to learn all those things by fire, I think I underestimated, but I think that just the, I kind of look at it a little bit as like the parenting analogy. Like you constantly are worried about your kids. I'm constantly thinking and worried, if you will, about my team and what they need and benefits and, you know, all of these different things, and making sure people have bandwidth and headspace. And are they actually telling me how they feel? Am I able to like make sure I can meet them where they are? And so I think that has been the biggest surprise for me in a weird way. You know, you think it's obvious, but it's not until you have the sleepless nights. Yeah, it's the amount of headspace that it takes up. And I think it's important that it takes up that headspace. It's just, it's a heavy lift sometimes to make sure that, you know, you're taking care of yourself, but also your team.
That's
I
great.
think that's good. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Well, Lisa, we gotta say it's time here, but thank you so much. Really appreciate your
this is
insight.
so fun.
Yeah, your insight's amazing. So that's why I didn't want to give it away in the beginning, because I knew there would be, you know, some good insight on some stuff, and great content. We really appreciate it. If people want to get a hold of you, Lisa, how can they do that?
Yeah, send me an email. I'm just lisa@retainhr.com. Or our website is just www.retainhr.com. I'm
Awesome.
happy
Well,
to chat with anyone.
beautiful. Thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate
Yeah,
it. And to
thank
all,
you.
anytime. To all our listeners out there, Jan and I, as always, thank you for the support that you give us, and we love the emails, so keep them coming. We love when we can get an email that says, "Man, did I learn a lot from Lisa?" So hopefully
Yeah.
we get one of those, but those are always exciting to get. So until the next time, folks, stay safe and be healthy.